16 years is a long time to keep a secret. It is enough time for memories to fade, for families to quietly give up hope, and for a cold case to become just another dusty file in a police basement. But secrets have a way of surviving, often hiding in the most ordinary places until someone is finally ready to look. For Claire Morgan, the truth was waiting inside a cardboard shoebox in her late parents' attic. It was the fall of 2014, and Claire was simply sorting through forgotten belongings, childhood memories, old winter coats, and college textbooks that had survived multiple moves. Tucked beneath a stack of faded photographs was a standard, black VHS cassette. It had no commercial label. Instead, across the white sticker on the spine, a message was written in blue ink. Claire recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to a 20-year-old girl who had vanished from the world a decade and a half earlier. The handwriting of a college student who never made it to graduation. The label contained only 3 words: "Don't open. Ever." To understand why a bright, ambitious young woman would leave behind such a quiet, desperate warning, we have to go back to a time when her future seemed guaranteed. We have to go back to the fall of 1998. Hannah Brooks was the kind of person who naturally drew people in. At 20 years old, she was a junior psychology major at a respected state university, and she possessed a rare kind of quiet empathy. She wasn't the loudest person in a crowded room, but she was always the one paying the most attention. Classmates frequently sought her out for advice. Professors trusted her with sensitive academic work. She had a reputation for listening without judging, a trait that made her an ideal candidate for her chosen career path. Hannah wanted to become a criminal psychologist. She believed that human behavior, even at its darkest, followed patterns that could be understood if someone was willing to ask the right questions. She didn't want to just profile offenders from a distance. She wanted to sit across from them, understand their history, and figure out exactly where the human mind breaks down. For 2 years, she shared a modest campus dorm room with Claire. They were a perfect balance. Claire was a pragmatic business major, focused on schedules and spreadsheets, while Hannah was deeply curious, constantly analyzing social dynamics and human behavior. Their room was a sanctuary of late-night conversations, instant coffee, and careful planning. They had mapped out the rest of their lives. They were going to walk across the graduation stage together, take a celebratory road trip down the coast, and then start their respective careers hundreds of miles apart. It was a solid, unbreakable plan. Because Hannah was so dedicated to her field, it was common for her to volunteer for extra work within the university's psychology department. It was a prestigious program, known for conducting advanced behavioral research. Being chosen to assist with these studies was a badge of honor for undergraduate students. Hannah spent countless hours organizing files, conducting preliminary participant interviews, and sorting data in the windowless administrative offices on the ground floor of the department building. For the first few weeks of the fall semester, everything felt entirely normal. Hannah attended her classes, debated theory with her professors, and spent her evenings studying in the library with Claire. But as October arrived, a subtle shift occurred. It wasn't something obvious. Hannah didn't seem terrified. She didn't stop going to class. She simply became distracted. Claire would often find her sitting on her bed staring at her notebooks without turning the pages. When the dorm room phone rang, Hannah would let it ring 3 or 4 times before carefully picking up the receiver, her voice dropping to a low whisper if the caller was someone from the department. Claire asked her about it twice. Both times, Hannah offered a reassuring smile and blamed the stress of midterms. She claimed she was just tired from a heavy workload. Because Hannah was known for pushing herself academically, Claire accepted the excuse. It was normal for college students to burn out by late October. Thursday, November 5th, began like any other autumn day on campus. The weather was dropping, the sky was a dull gray, and students were rushing between buildings with their heads down against the wind. That evening, Hannah and Claire went to the university library. They claimed their usual table on the 3rd floor, a quiet section hidden behind rows of towering steel bookshelves. For 2 hours, they worked in comfortable silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, the campus grew quiet as the evening deepened. Just before 9 o'clock, Hannah began packing her things. She slid her textbooks into her worn canvas backpack, zipped her pencil case, and folded her jacket over her arm. As she stood up, Claire noticed something unusual. In her left hand, Hannah was holding a standard VHS tape. It was a strange item to carry around. While videocassettes were common in 1998, Hannah didn't own a camcorder, and they didn't have a VCR in their dorm room. The tape had no cover, just the black plastic casing. Claire looked at the cassette and asked what she was working on. Hannah paused. For a brief second, her expression tightened, losing the natural warmth she always carried. She looked down at the tape, then back at Claire. "It's just a project," Hannah said softly. "I'll explain it all to you tomorrow. I promise." She smiled, adjusted the strap of her backpack, and walked away. Claire watched her friend navigate the narrow aisle between the bookshelves, head toward the main stairwell, and disappear from view. A few moments later, Claire heard the heavy glass doors of the library lobby push open and click shut. That brief, ordinary exchange was the last time Claire Morgan ever saw her roommate. Friday morning arrived with a cold rain washing over the campus. When Claire woke up, the dorm room was quiet. She rolled over and looked across the narrow space. Hannah's bed was perfectly made, exactly as she had left it the morning before. Initially, Claire felt no panic. College life is fluid. She assumed Hannah had stayed late at the library, fallen asleep on a couch in the student lounge, or gone straight to her early morning cognitive psychology lecture. Claire got dressed, grabbed her umbrella, and headed to her own classes. By early afternoon, the rationalizations began to fade. Claire returned to the dorm around 2 o'clock. The room was still empty. Hannah had not returned to drop off her bag or change clothes. Feeling a slight knot of unease, Claire used the room's landline to call a mutual friend who shared Hannah's morning class. The friend answered after 3 rings. No, Hannah had not been in class. In fact, she had missed a mandatory group presentation, something the fiercely responsible student would never voluntarily skip. The knot in Claire's stomach tightened into dread. She walked across campus to the psychology building, hoping to find Hannah in the basement offices where she usually volunteered. The administrative assistant at the front desk frowned when Claire asked about her. Hannah hadn't shown up for her scheduled shift. No one in the department had seen her all day. By 5 o'clock that evening, the reality of the situation settled over the dorm room like a heavy weight. Claire dialed the home number of Hannah's parents. The conversation was brief and painful. Hannah's mother answered the phone, her voice light and cheerful, until Claire explained the situation. The silence that followed was thick with immediate, instinctual terror. Parents know when something is deeply wrong with their child. Within 10 minutes, Hannah's parents were in their car, making the 3-hour drive to the university. Campus police were dispatched to the dorm room shortly after sunset. 2 uniformed officers stood in the center of the small room, holding clipboards and asking routine questions. They checked the closet. They looked under the bed. They noted that Hannah's toothbrush was still in its plastic holder. Her winter coat was still on its plastic holder. Her winter coat was still on its plastic holder. Her car keys were sitting on her desk. Despite these details, the officers projected a calm, dismissive confidence. They explained to Claire and Hannah's terrified parents that university students disappear all the time. The pressure of final projects, relationship issues, or simple academic burnout often causes young adults to walk away for a few days to clear their heads. There were no signs of a struggle in the room. There was no evidence of foul play on the campus grounds. Hannah was a 20-year-old legal adult. If she wanted to leave, she had every right to do so. They filed a missing person report, but the underlying message was clear: give it a weekend. She will probably call home by Sunday. If you appreciate deep dives into unresolved cases, taking a moment to subscribe to Fame Buzz helps us bring more of these hidden stories to light. The police officers eventually left, leaving Claire and Hannah's parents alone in the quiet dorm room. Outside, the rain continued to fall against the window glass. Hannah's mother sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, quietly weeping into her hands. Her father stood by the door, staring out into the dark hallway as if waiting for his daughter to turn the corner and apologize for the misunderstanding. But Claire stood by the desk, looking at the empty space where Hannah usually kept her canvas backpack. The police believed the stressed college student had simply walked away to find some peace. But Claire knew Hannah better than anyone. Hannah would never abandon a research project, she would never ignore her parents, and she would never leave her winter coat behind in November. More importantly, Claire could not stop thinking about the final moments in the library. If Hannah had simply run away from the pressure of school, why did she leave with a blank VHS tape? What was recorded on it? And why was a brilliant psychology student so determined to keep it a secret? The weekend passed in a slow, agonizing crawl. By Monday morning, the fading hope of a simple misunderstanding had evaporated entirely, replaced by a heavy, bureaucratic law enforcement presence. Jurisdiction transitioned from campus security to the municipal police department. The case was assigned to Detective Robert Miller, a grounded, pragmatic investigator with 20 years of experience handling missing persons. He was accompanied by a younger, meticulous investigator named Detective Mark Evans, who was tasked with managing the growing file of evidence logs, witness statements, and campus blueprints. From the outside, the initial response looked massive. A temporary command center was established in the student union. Search teams, comprised of off-duty officers and student volunteers, formed long lines across the damp athletic fields, walking shoulder to check the tall grass. Police dogs were brought in to trace the 400-yard paved walkway connecting the library to Hannah's dorm building. But the heavy autumn rain that fell on Friday had washed away the physical environment. The tracking dogs caught a faint trace of Hannah's scent near the library's heavy glass doors, but the trail vanished the moment it reached the wet pavement of the main campus quad. There were no discarded belongings in the bushes. There was no sign of a struggle. The physical evidence ended before it even began. Because they lacked a crime scene, the detectives relied on behavioral profiling. On Tuesday afternoon, Detective Miller sat down with Claire in a sterile, windowless conference room inside the campus security building. Detective Evans sat quietly in the corner, taking rapid notes on a yellow legal pad. Miller's approach was gentle but frustratingly narrow. He asked Claire to walk him through Hannah's personal life. He wanted to know about secret boyfriends, financial struggles, and academic anxiety. He asked if Hannah had ever mentioned feeling overwhelmed or if she had a history of depression. Claire answered every question, but she could feel the narrative shifting in the room. The detectives were not looking for an abducted student, they were looking for a stressed young adult who had intentionally walked away. Miller explained that in missing person cases involving adults, the absence of a crime scene usually points toward a voluntary departure. Hannah was 20 years old. She carried a heavy course load. She was involved in high-level academic research. The pressure of maintaining a perfect academic record often caused students to snap, abandoning their routines to seek an escape. Claire pushed back hard against the theory. She explained that Hannah was deeply ambitious and fiercely loyal to her parents. She pointed out that Hannah had left her heavy winter coat in the closet on a night when the temperature was dropping near freezing. Most importantly, Claire tried to explain the strange interaction in the library, the blank VHS cassette, the sudden shift in Hannah's demeanor, and her promise to explain everything the next day. Miller listened politely, nodding in a way that signaled he had already made up his mind. A blank tape and a canceled conversation did not constitute evidence of a crime. To the police, it simply sounded like a student who was overwhelmed by a project and too embarrassed to talk about it. To cover their bases, the detectives visited the psychology department the following morning. The basement administrative offices were quiet, filled with the hum of copy machines and the smell of old paper. Miller and Evans requested a meeting with Dr. William Harris, a highly respected senior professor who oversaw the behavioral research division where Hannah volunteered. Dr. Harris was perfectly accommodating. He invited the detectives into his office, offered them coffee, and answered their questions with calm professionalism. When asked about Hannah Brooks, the professor sighed, expressing deep sympathy for her family. But his actual statement was remarkably brief. He told investigators that while Hannah was a diligent and reliable student, he barely knew her outside of a lecture hall setting. He explained that the research department utilized dozens of undergraduate volunteers every semester to handle basic data entry and file organization. According to Dr. Harris, Hannah was just a face in a very large crowd. She was a good worker, but they had never shared a meaningful conversation. Detective Evans documented the statement in the official file. It perfectly matched their working theory. Hannah was just a small piece of a large academic machine, likely feeling ignored or overwhelmed by her lack of significance in the program. But when Claire was later informed of the professor's statement, it created a quiet, sickening sense of wrongness in her stomach. Hannah had practically lived in that basement office. For months, she had spoken passionately to Claire about Dr. Ayers' research methods, mentioning specific data sets she was trusted to organize. She admired the professor deeply. Why would he claim she was virtually a stranger? Claire mentioned this discrepancy to the police, but her concerns were politely dismissed. She was a grieving 20-year-old business major. The police were seasoned investigators relying on institutional testimony. Without physical proof that Hannah was deeply involved in sensitive research, the professor's word was accepted as absolute fact. By December, the campus emptied for the winter holidays, leaving the university feeling like a hollow, frozen ghost town. Hannah's parents, Richard and Elena, refused to leave. They rented a cheap, ground-floor room at a motel on the edge of town, converting it into their own command center. Richard spent his days driving to neighboring counties, handing out stacks of missing person flyers to gas station attendants and truck stop managers. Elena spent her days sitting on the edge of the motel bed, refusing to use the room's telephone in case her daughter tried to call. They held a desperate press conference on the steps of the local police department. Richard stood before the local news cameras, his face drawn and exhausted, holding a photograph of his smiling daughter. He pleaded with the public, insisting that Hannah would never run away, begging anyone with information to come forward. But public sympathy is a finite resource. Without a crime scene, without a suspect, and without any new developments, the news cameras eventually stopped showing up. If you appreciate documentaries that follow every piece of evidence, taking a moment to subscribe to Fame Buzz helps us continue bringing these complex cases to light. As the new year arrived, the investigation fractured into a series of dead ends. A reported sighting of a young woman matching Hannah's description at a diner 3 towns away turned out to be a local high school student. A bus ticket purchased in a neighboring state under a similar name led to a middle-aged woman traveling for work. With no fresh leads to follow, the police department began scaling back their active search efforts. Detective Miller was reassigned to a string of local burglaries. The daily phone calls to the Brooks family became weekly check-ins, and then eventually, they stopped altogether. The most agonizing reality of a disappearance is that the rest of the world continues to move forward. The university administration, bound by housing contracts and incoming student schedules, informed Richard and Elena that Hannah's dorm room needed to be cleared before the spring semester began. On a quiet, overcast Saturday in early January, Claire helped Hannah's parents dismantle the life their daughter had built. It is a uniquely devastating task to pack away a missing person's belongings. Every object feels heavy with unresolved meaning. Claire carefully folded Hannah's sweaters, the faint scent of her floral perfume still clinging to the fabric. She took down the carefully organized calendar above the desk, noting that Hannah had written "study group" on the day after she vanished. Richard carried heavy boxes of textbooks down the stairs, his jaw clenched tight, while Elena quietly wept over a drawer of handwritten letters. When the room was nearly empty, Claire reached the top shelf of the narrow dorm closet. Pushed all the way to the back, behind a row of winter boots were a few unmarked cardboard shoeboxes. Claire did not open them. It felt like an invasion of privacy, a violation of the quiet hope that Hannah might walk through the door at any moment and demand to know why they were touching her things. Instead, Claire simply placed a strip of heavy packing tape across the lids, securing them shut. She carried the shoeboxes down to the parking lot and set them gently into the trunk of the Brooks family station wagon. Those boxes would make the 3-hour journey back to Hannah's childhood home, where they would be carried up a narrow set of wooden stairs and placed in the dark, quiet corner of the attic. The 1998 investigation was officially reclassified as a cold case. The police moved on. The university moved on. To the outside world, Hannah Brooks was simply a tragic academic casualty. A bright student in the URI moved on. To the outside world, Hannah Brooks was simply a tragic academic casualty, a bright student who had cracked under the own and bit sick. But hidden within the thousands of pages of the archived police file, a quiet mystery remained entirely unresolved. When Detective Evans had originally cataloged the few belongings Hannah left at the library table, he documented a crumpled receipt found inside the pocket of her jacket. It was from a local electronics store, dated Tuesday, just 2 days before she vanished. The receipt was for a standard 2-pack of blank VHS recording cassettes. Claire had clearly seen Hannah holding one of those blank tapes in the library on Thursday night. But despite a thorough search of the dorm room, her car, and her locker in the psychology department, the police never found the second tape. It was a minor detail, easily dismissed by investigators as lost property or a simple clerical error. In a case defined by missing information, a missing piece of plastic hardly seemed important. Yet it was not the only quiet disappearance that month. Less than 2 weeks after the police officially stopped searching for Hannah, a major behavioral research study operating out of the university's psychology department was abruptly and permanently shut down. Its funding was pulled overnight. The undergraduate participants were quietly dismissed. No research data was ever published in any academic journal, and no explanation was ever given to the faculty. The study was erased from the university directory as if it had never existed, leaving behind nothing but an empty basement room, a grieving family, and a deeply buried secret waiting for the passage of time. 16 years can erase almost anything. It is enough time for a college campus to tear down old dormitories and build new ones. It is enough time for an ambitious young business major to become a seasoned corporate executive. And it is more than enough time for a family to quietly break apart under the weight of an unanswered question. Richard and Elena Brooks spent a decade and a half waiting for a phone call that never came. They never changed the locks on their front door. They kept Hannah's childhood bedroom exactly as it was. But grief is a slow, relentless physical toll. Richard suffered a fatal heart attack in 2010, and Elena, exhausted by a lifetime of sorrow, passed away quietly in the spring of 2014. They died without ever knowing what happened to their only child. Because Hannah had no siblings, the responsibility of settling the Brooks estate fell to the one person who still carried her memory every single day. Claire Morgan was now 36 years old. She took 2 weeks off from a job in Chicago to return to Hannah's childhood home, tasked with the heavy burden of clearing out the house before it could be sold. The house was quiet, filled with the stale air of untouched rooms and the lingering sadness of a family that had simply stopped living. On her third day of cleaning, Claire pulled the folding wooden stairs down from the hallway ceiling and climbed into the suffocating heat of the attic. The space was packed with decades of accumulated memories, but Claire's attention was immediately drawn to a stack of taped cardboard shoeboxes pushed into the far corner. The heavy packing tape was yellowed and brittle. Claire recognized them instantly. They were the same boxes she had packed in that freezing campus dorm room 16 years earlier. Sitting on the dusty floorboards, Claire used a pocket knife to slice through the old tape. Inside the first box were faded sweaters and a few psychology textbooks. But inside the second box, resting beneath a heavy winter scarf, was a black, unmarked VHS cassette. A blue ink warning was written across the spine in Hannah's unmistakable handwriting. "Don't open, ever." Claire sat in the sweltering attic, her heart pounding against her ribs. She remembered the rainy Thursday night in the university library. She remembered the blank tape in Hannah's hand. The police had completely missed it during their cursory search of the dorm room, simply because Claire had packed it away before they ever thought to look closely at the top shelf of the closet. Claire did not hesitate. She carried the tape downstairs, drove to a local thrift store, and purchased an old, heavy VCR. She set it up on the living room floor, connected the cables to the Brooks family television, and pushed the cassette into the machine. The screen flickered black. The tracking lines rolled heavily for a few seconds, and then a ghost appeared. There was Hannah, 20 years old, sitting on the edge of her dorm room bed. She was wearing the same faded green sweater she had worn the day she vanished. The sight of her moving, breathing, and smiling was a profound emotional shock. For Claire, it felt as though the last 16 years collapsed in an instant. The tape began like a simple, light-hearted video diary. Hannah adjusted the camera angle, smiled softly into the lens, and talked about her classes. She complained about the dining hall food and joked about Claire's obsessive study schedule. It was ordinary. It was innocent. But 3 minutes into the recording, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Hannah stopped smiling. She looked nervously toward the closed dorm room door, listening closely for footsteps in the hallway. When she turned back to the camera, the youthful warmth in her face was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, hardened expression Claire had never seen before. "I don't have a lot of time," Hannah whispered, her voice tight with genuine fear. "I'm recording this because I think something is going to happen, and I need someone to know that someone is lying inside the psychology department." Claire stopped breathing. She reached out and turned the television volume up, her hands trembling. On the screen, Hannah leaned closer to the camera. She explained that the behavioral research study she was assisting with was a lie. The undergraduate participants, who believed they were taking part in standard cognitive testing, were actually being subjected to extreme psychological manipulation without their consent or knowledge. She didn't name the specific methods, but she described watching students suffer severe emotional breakdowns that were deliberately caused, recorded, and suppressed by the faculty. "They are hurting people," Hannah said, her voice shaking slightly. "And they are burying the data so the university doesn't lose its funding." Hannah took a deep breath, steadying herself. She looked directly into the lens. "I copied the files. I took the raw participant logs from Dr. Aris's locked cabinet, and I copied everything. I hid the documents. I can't say where because I don't trust anyone connected to this building anymore. But if you are watching this, it means I wasn't able to deliver them. It means they found out what I did." The screen faded to static. Claire sat on the living room floor, the hiss of the television filling the empty house. The police had been wrong. Hannah had not walked away from the pressure of school. She had uncovered a coordinated institutional crime, and she had been terrified for her life. The next morning, Claire drove straight to the municipal police department. She carried the VCR and the tape through the front doors and demanded to speak with anyone connected to the 1998 investigation. The front desk officer, noting the severity in her voice, made a phone call. 10 minutes later, Claire was sitting across from Lieutenant Mark Evans. 16 years earlier, Evans had been the young, meticulous junior detective taking notes in the corner while his older partner dismissed Claire's concerns. Now, he was a senior investigator with silver hair and a heavy sense of professional regret. He remembered Hannah Brooks. He remembered the canceled library conversation. And as he watched a VHS tape play on a small monitor on his desk, Claire watched the blood drain entirely from his face. When the tape ended, Evans sat in heavy silence. He did not offer excuses. He did not defend his former partner. He simply picked up his desk phone and formally ordered the Hannah Brooks cold case to be reopened. The investigation moved with an urgency that had been entirely absent in 1998. Evans knew they were 16 years behind, and the people involved had enjoyed over a decade of comfortable silence. He needed to apply pressure immediately. His first step was to verify Hannah's claim. Evans secured a warrant for the university's historical archives, specifically targeting the 1998 administrative logs for the psychology department. He was looking for the original participant files Hannah claimed to have copied. The files were gone. The archive ledger showed that 4 heavy boxes of behavioral research data were permanently signed out by a university administrator on Monday, November 9, 1998, exactly 4 days after Hannah disappeared. The files were never returned. The timing was not a coincidence. It was a surgical removal of evidence while the police were busy searching the athletic fields for a runaway student. Knowing that a cover-up relies on silence, Evans decided to break it. He released a highly controlled statement to the local news networks, announcing that physical evidence had been recovered proving Hannah Brooks did not leave campus voluntarily and that the police were investigating historical misconduct within the university. The strategy worked. 2 days after the broadcast, an elderly man walked into the police station. His name was Arthur Pendleton, a retired campus janitor who had worked the evening shift in the psychology building during the late 90s. He was nervous, holding a worn flat cap in his hands, explaining that he had seen the news and felt a terrible weight of guilt for staying quiet for so long. Arthur sat down with Evans and described the afternoon of Thursday, November 5th, the exact day Hannah vanished. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, Arthur was emptying trash cans in the basement hallway of the psychology department. The offices were mostly empty. From around the corner, he heard a tense, heated argument. He stopped mopping and looked down the corridor. He saw Hannah Brooks standing near the stairwell. She was clutching a thick manila folder against her chest. Standing blocking her path was Dr. William Eris. Arthur remembered the professor's voice being low but vicious. He heard Eris tell the young student, "You have no idea what you are dealing with. You leave those files here or you will ruin your entire life." Hannah had shaken her head, pushed past the professor, and ran up the stairs. Evans documented the statement with cold precision. 16 years earlier, Dr. Eris had sat in a comfortable office, sipped coffee, and told the police he barely knew who Hannah was. It was a calculated, deliberate lie, designed to distance himself from a student he had just threatened. If you are captivated by real investigations that refuse to stay buried, subscribing to Fame Buzz ensures you never miss the conclusion of these incredible stories. The focus of the investigation now locked onto the canceled research project. Evans needed to know exactly what Hannah was trying to expose. He subpoenaed the remaining financial and registration records from the university's 1998 academic year. While the actual research data had been destroyed, the Brazar's office still held the payment records for the undergraduate students who had participated in the study. Evans and his team spent 3 days matching names against university withdrawal forms. They were looking for anomaly students who had broken their routines during the same period Hannah was investigating the department. Late on a Thursday night, a young analyst brought a single file to Evans's desk. The name on the file was Sarah Jenkins. She was an undergraduate freshman in 1998 and a registered participant in Dr. Eris's behavioral study. According to the registrar's records, Sarah had quietly withdrawn from all of her classes on October 22, exactly 2 weeks before Hannah disappeared. What made the file terrifying was the exit pattern. Sarah hadn't just changed her major. She had abandoned a full academic scholarship, packed her belongings in the middle of the night, and moved across the country without notifying her academic advisor or claiming her tuition refund. It was the desperate, uncoordinated flight of someone running for their life. Using modern tax records, Evans tracked Sarah Jenkins to a small, rural town in Oregon. She was now a married mother of 2, living a quiet life entirely disconnected from her past. Evans did not send local police to her door. He wanted to handle the connection carefully. He dialed her residential phone number, sitting alone in his office as the line rang. A woman answered, her voice tired and distracted by the sound of children playing in the background. "Sarah Jenkins," Evans asked quietly. "Yes, speaking." "Ma'am, my name is Lieutenant Mark Evans. I'm calling from the Municipal Police Department regarding an old case. I need to speak with you about your time at the university in 1998. Specifically, I need to talk to you about a student named Hannah Brooks." The children in the background continued to play, but the line went completely dead silent. The silence stretched for so long that Evans thought she had hung up. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with a fear that had clearly never faded. "I knew this phone call was coming," she said, her breath catching in her throat. "I've waited 16 years for this phone call." Evans picked up his pen. "Why did you leave school so suddenly, Sarah?" The answer came back cold and broken. "Because Hannah came to my dorm room," Sarah whispered. "She knocked on my door in the middle of the night. She told me the professors weren't just observing us. She told me to pack my bags, leave the state, and never tell anyone where I went." Sarah paused, holding back a sob. "She saved my life, and I knew, the moment I saw her picture on the news 2 weeks later. I knew they had punished her for it." "She didn't just fear Dr. Eris," Sarah explained over the phone, the years of hidden anxiety finally spilling out into the quiet Oregon afternoon. "Hannah told me she tried to warn a department counselor first. But 2 days later, her security clearance for the basement lab was mysteriously suspended. That's when she realized the whole administration knew. Eris wasn't acting alone. The people we were supposed to report the abuse to were the ones actively funding it." Sarah took a shaky breath, the sound of her children playing in the background serving as a sharp contrast to the horror of her memory. "Hannah said they were all protecting him. She told me to get out before they realized I was talking to her. I packed my car that night and drove until I ran out of gas. I'm so sorry I didn't say anything. I was just so terrified." Evans thanked her and gently hung up the phone. The investigation was no longer about a single rogue professor. It was about a protected institution. The next morning, Claire returned to the sweltering heat of her childhood attic. She pulled every remaining box from the shadows, searching for anything the police might have overlooked in 1998. At the bottom of a plastic storage bin, beneath a stack of old textbooks, she found Hannah's spiral-bound daily planner. Claire carried it downstairs to the kitchen table. She flipped through the meticulously color-coded schedule, scanning the dates. But when she reached late October, the entries abruptly stopped. Someone had taken a straight razor and carefully sliced out 6 pages covering the exact week before the disappearance. Claire immediately drove the planner to the police station. Evans submitted the notebook to a state forensic document examiner. The results were chilling. The slight oxidation on the cut edges of the paper proved the pages were removed 16 years earlier, long before Claire ever taped the boxes shut. That meant someone had gained access to the dorm room in the chaotic days immediately after Hannah vanished. While campus security was searching the athletic fields, and while Claire was sitting in the room crying with Hannah's parents, someone had quietly slipped in and removed her private notes before investigators ever thought to collect them. Evans needed to know exactly who Hannah was trying to expose the conspiracy to before she was silenced. He pulled the archived 1998 telephone records for her campus landline. Amidst the usual calls to her parents and classmates, Evans found 3 brief, 2-minute connections made to the metro desk of a regional newspaper. Following the paper trail, Evans discovered that Hannah had scheduled a secret, off-campus meeting with a veteran investigative journalist named Thomas Vance just 3 days before she went missing. Vance was no longer alive to answer questions. He had passed away from cancer in 2005, without ever publishing a word about the university. But his daughter, a retired schoolteacher, allowed detectives to search his meticulously organized garage for any remaining files. Inside a dusty, expanding folder labeled simply University Inquiry, Evans found Vance's handwritten interview notes. The journalist wrote that his student source, labeled HB, had successfully stolen raw psychological research data. But it was the note scrawled at the very bottom of the legal pad that changed the entire direction of the case. Vance had written, "Source does not trust campus security. Believes her room is being searched. Created a second recording as an insurance policy. Audio only. An audio cassette." Evans drove straight back to the municipal police department and requested the original cardboard evidence box from the 1998 archives. He sifted through the yellowed paperwork until he found the faded electronics store receipt from Hannah's jacket pocket. It confirmed she had purchased a 2-pack of blank recording tapes. Evans then pulled the original chain of custody log for Hannah's canvas backpack. He ran his finger down the handwritten inventory list. It read, 1 blue notebook, 3 pens, campus ID. But right below that, a thick, heavy line of black ink had been drawn across the page, deliberately scratching an item out of existence. Holding the paper up to a high-intensity forensic light, Evans could clearly read the words hidden beneath the ink. 1 audio cassette tape. Next to the redaction were the initials of the booking officer, Greg Larson. Evans felt a sickening wave of anger wash over him. Larson had been the desk sergeant the night Hannah's parents arrived at the station. Cross-referencing city employment records, Evans discovered that Larson had altered the evidence log mere hours after the missing person report was filed. 4 months later, Larson quietly resigned from law enforcement. He immediately accepted a highly lucrative, unadvertised administrative security position, directly overseen by the university's board of directors. The cover-up had not just outsmarted the police department, it had actively recruited from inside it. While Evans traced the web of corruption, Claire remained seated in the police station conference room, watching the recovered VHS tape on a loop. She was looking for any hint, any small visual clue that might explain where Hannah had hidden the missing audio cassette. During her 50th careful viewing, she paused the screen just as Hannah leaned forward to deliver her warning to the camera. Claire noticed a slight visual distortion in the dark glass of the dorm room window behind Hannah's shoulder. Illuminated faintly by a distant courtyard street lamp, there was a reflection. Someone was standing outside in the cold perfectly still, watching the window while Hannah recorded the message. Evans immediately sent the frozen frame to the state crime laboratory. Modern digital enhancement managed to pull enough detail from the glare to identify a distinctive heavy athletics coat and the side profile of a young man. It was David Cole, a graduate research assistant who had worked directly under Dr. Harris. During the original investigation, police never interviewed him because his name wasn't listed on the undergraduate volunteer roster. Evans tracked Cole down to a neighboring county, where he was now working as a high school biology teacher. When Evans walked into the empty classroom and slid the enhanced photograph across the grading desk, the middle-aged teacher stared at it for a long time. Then, the years of hidden guilt finally crushed him. Cole buried his face in his hands and wept. He admitted he was standing outside the window, but he wasn't spying on Hannah. He was acting as her lookout. Cole confessed that he had secretly helped Hannah bypass the department's heavy security locks so she could photocopy the abusive research data. Knowing her dorm room wasn't safe, Cole said Hannah rented an off-campus storage locker under her student ID to hide the files. He believed she had safely handed the evidence over to the newspaper reporter. He swore he had no idea she was going to vanish the very next night, and he was too terrified of the university administration to ever come forward. Evans wasted no time. He secured a judicial warrant for the aging storage facility on the industrial outskirts of town. He drove to the site and used a pair of heavy bolt cutters to snap the rusted padlock off the rolling door himself. Inside the dusty windowless locker, sitting alone on a metal shelving unit, were 4 thick plastic document folders. Evans opened them, his heart racing. They were completely empty. Someone had beaten the police to the lockers 16 years earlier. However, whoever emptied the files had made a single arrogant mistake. Forensics dusted the plastic folders and lifted a clear, perfect thumbprint from the inside flap. When they ran to print through the state database, it did not belong to Dr. Harris. It belonged to Evelyn Thorne, the university's senior legal advisor. She was the exact same woman who had sat in an official police deposition in 1998 and sworn under oath that she had never met or heard of a student named Hannah Brooks. Supposed financial records requested by the district attorney soon revealed a staggering truth. Over the course of a decade, the university had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars quietly settling multiple confidential lawsuits regarding extreme psychological abuse within the research department. The administration had essentially paid to erase the victims, leaving Hannah entirely alone when she attempted to expose the machine. The police finally had the motive. They had the conspirators. They had the fingerprints proving a massive institutional cover-up. But they still lacked the actual proof. The physical research files were gone. The reporter's notes were incomplete. The only piece of hard evidence left in the world that could secure criminal indictments and explain exactly what happened to Hannah was the missing audio cassette, and they had absolutely no idea where it was. Claire sat alone in the dark conference room listening to the VHS tape play one more time. The recording played its innocent, ordinary beginning. Hannah was smiling brightly into the lens, complaining about the dining hall food and making a casual joke about Claire losing a textbook. "And Claire," Hannah said on the tape, laughing softly, "if you don't return that abnormal psychology book to the third-floor donation bin by tomorrow, the campus librarian is going to permanently expel you." Claire stared at the screen. She felt the blood rush in her ears. She hadn't lost a textbook. She was a business major. She didn't even take psychology classes, and she hadn't been to the third floor of the library in weeks. The words weren't a joke. Claire realized that the casual, smiling conversation at the very beginning of the tape was a carefully constructed code. It was designed to sound perfectly normal to anyone else who might intercept the video, but it was meant specifically to guide the one person in the world who knew her daily routine well enough to recognize the lie. Claire stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs, and looked at Lieutenant Evans as he walked back into the room. "She didn't take the second tape with her," Claire said, her voice trembling with sudden clarity. "I know exactly where she hid it." The university library had undergone massive renovations over the 16 years since Hannah disappeared. The heavy glass doors and tall steel bookshelves from 1998 had been replaced by modern architecture and digital study spaces. But universities are institutions of preservation. They rarely throw away academic materials. When older library resources were phased out, they were boxed, cataloged and moved to a climate-controlled auxiliary storage facility on the industrial edge of town. Lieutenant Evans did not wait for morning. He secured an emergency access order, waking the campus facility manager and demanding immediate entry to the storage warehouse. The building was a cavernous grid of concrete walls and metal shelving holding thousands of boxes filled with outdated journals, administrative records, and donated textbooks. Guided by the facility manager's inventory ledger, Evans and Claire navigated the narrow aisles until they reached a section designated for the late 1990s. There, resting on a bottom shelf, was a heavy plastic bin labeled with a faded marker, Department Donations, Psychology. Claire knelt on the concrete floor and pulled the lid off. The bin smelled of old paper and dust. She sorted through a dozen outdated manuals, a heavy medical dictionary, and a stack of student workbooks. Near the bottom, wedged tightly against the plastic wall of the bin, was a thick, hardcover textbook on abnormal psychology. Claire pulled it out. The spine was intact, but when she turned it over in her hands, the book felt strangely light. She opened the front cover. Starting at Chapter 2, a deep, precise square had been carved through the center of the pages, creating a hidden compartment. Resting perfectly inside that hollowed space was a single audio cassette. It was wrapped in the small sheet of notebook paper. Unfolding the paper, Claire recognized Hannah's neat handwriting outlining a brief list of dates, times, and the names of 4 senior administrators. They rushed the tape back to the police department. Evans placed it into a digital transcriber on his desk, connected a set of external speakers, and pressed play. Unlike the VHS video, this recording did not feature Hannah speaking to a camera. It was captured entirely in secret. Hannah must have left her bag in an administrative conference room or quietly slipped a handheld recorder under a desk before a faculty meeting began. The audio was filled with the ambient sounds of a closed-door office, the rustle of paper, the clinking of a coffee cup, and the unmistakable voices of Dr. William Harris and University legal advisor Evelyn Thorne. They were not discussing academic theories. They were discussing containment. On the tape, Thorne's voice was sharp and commanding. She outlined exactly how much financial damage the university would suffer if the state discovered the psychological abuse occurring in the basement lab. She listed the names of the student participants whose lives had been permanently damaged, treating their trauma as a mere statistical liability. Dr. Harris responded with a cold, calculated strategy. He detailed a plan to deliberately sabotage Hannah Brooks's academic record, suspend her security clearance, and isolate her from the rest of the faculty. "If she speaks," Thorne warned on the tape, "we lose the funding, we lose the department, we lose everything." "She won't speak," Harris replied calmly. "We pull her clearance today. If she tries to go to the police, she will look like a failing, vindictive student who couldn't handle the pressure of the program. I will make sure no one ever believes a word she says." The recording ended with the heavy click of a door closing. Evans stopped the machine. The room was silent. The tape was absolute, undeniable proof of a coordinated institutional cover-up. It proved the administration was aware of the abuse and actively working to destroy Hannah's credibility, to protect their funding. But as Evans stared at the cassette, a profound sense of unease washed over him. The recording proved conspiracy. It proved fraud and obstruction. But nowhere in the 20-minute conversation did Thorne or Harris mention violence. They discussed ruining Hannah academically, but they did not discuss killing her. If their plan was simply to discredit her, why did she vanish into the winter night? Evans pulled the case file closer, spreading the witness statements across his desk. He looked at the timeline. He looked at the library interaction. He looked at the phone records. And then, his eyes locked onto the deposition provided by Arthur Pendleton, the retired campus janitor. Arthur claimed he saw Hannah arguing with Dr. Harris in the basement hallway at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. But Claire saw Hannah leaving the library holding the VHS tape near 9 o'clock that night. Arthur's story was true, but it was incomplete. He knew more about Hannah's final hours than he had admitted. The following afternoon, an unmarked police vehicle pulled into the driveway of Arthur Pendleton's modest suburban home. Evans did not send junior officers to handle the interview. He knocked on the front door himself. When the elderly man opened the door, he looked at the detective's face and seemed to age another 10 years in an instant. He did not ask why the police were there. He simply stepped aside, allowing Evans into his small, quiet living room, and sat down heavily in an armchair. "We found the tape, Arthur," Evans said, keeping his voice gentle but firm. "We know about the research. We know about the research. We know about Dr. Aris and the administration. But I need to know what happened to Hannah after she left the library." Arthur lowered his head, staring at his trembling hands. The weight of 16 years of hidden guilt pushed down on him, and a low, broken sob escaped his chest. "She was just a kid," Arthur whispered, tears welling in his tired eyes. "She was always so kind to me, always stopped to ask about my day. When Eris cornered her in the hallway that afternoon, she didn't just run up the stairs, she came looking for me." Arthur explained that Hannah had found him hiding in a maintenance closet. She was terrified. She knew she had been locked out of the department, and she knew the administration was watching her dorm room. She told Arthur she had evidence hidden away, but she needed to get off campus safely to meet a journalist in the city. Her own car was parked in a brightly lit lot patrolled by campus security, and she was afraid they would stop her before she could leave. "She asked me if I would drive her," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "I told her I got off shift at 9. I told her to pack whatever she needed, walk out of the library, and meet me at the old loading dock behind the dining hall at 9:15. I promised her I would be there." Evans felt his chest tighten. "What happened at 9:15, Arthur?" The old man buried his face in his hands, weeping openly. "I pulled my truck around to the alley," Arthur choked out, unable to look the detective in the eye. "But before I reached the dock, I saw them. 3 campus security vehicles, unmarked, blocking the exits. There were men standing near the tree line, watching the path. Powerful men. Men who could take away my pension, my job, my entire life." Arthur took a ragged breath, the memory tearing him apart. "I panicked. I thought about my wife. I thought about my daughters. I put my truck in reverse, and I drove away." Silence settled over the living room, heavy and suffocating. "I left her there," Arthur whispered. "I left her standing in the dark, waiting for someone who was never going to come." The final piece of the puzzle locked into place, forming a picture of devastating human tragedy. Reconstructing those final hours, investigators determined exactly what happened. Hannah Brooks had executed her plan perfectly. She secured the audio evidence in the library donation bin, carrying only the dummy VHS tape to throw off anyone who might be watching her. She walked into the cold November night, heading toward the loading dock, believing she was moments away from safety. But when Arthur failed to arrive, she was left isolated in the shadows of the campus. The unmarked security vehicles Arthur had seen belonged to private fixers hired by the administration men operating completely outside of standard law enforcement. They intercepted her at the loading dock. Hannah Brooks was abducted because she tried to do the right thing, and the one person who could have driven her to safety allowed his fear to win. Arthur Pendleton's silence became the final, fatal break in the chain that could have protected her. The resolution of the case hit the university like a seismic event. Armed with the audio cassette, the financial records, and Arthur's sworn confession, the district attorney convened a grand jury. The indictments were sweeping and merciless. Dr. William Aris was arrested at his home, led out in handcuffs while news helicopters circled overhead. Evelyn Thorne was taken into custody at her private law office. Greg Larson, the former desk sergeant who had altered the police evidence logs to buy the university time, was indicted for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. The Psychological Research Division was subjected to a massive federal investigation. Dozens of former undergraduate students, reading the news, finally understood the source of their lingering trauma and stepped forward to testify against the institution. Decades of meticulously constructed lies were dismantled in a matter of months. The men who physically took Hannah were never definitively identified, shielded by cash payments and missing records. Her remains were never recovered from the deep, vast woods surrounding the county. That physical absence left an open wound for those who loved her, a quiet sorrow that no court verdict could ever fully heal. But the truth of her disappearance was no longer a mystery. The narrative that she was a stressed student who simply walked away was permanently destroyed. Her name was restored. A few months after the trials concluded, Claire Morgan returned to the Brooks family home one last time. The house had been sold. The rooms were empty, swept clean, and filled with the bright morning sunlight. Claire walked through the quiet hallway, running her hand along the wooden banister. The suffocating weight that had hung over the property for 16 years was gone. Before leaving, Claire walked out to the front porch. She held the black VHS cassette in her hands. For a decade and a half, the police had looked at Hannah Brooks and seen only a victim. The university had looked at her and seen a liability. But Claire knew the truth. Hannah was never a runaway, and she was never helpless. Faced with a massive, terrifying machine of institutional power, a 20-year-old student had outsmarted them all. She knew they were coming for her. She knew the police might not believe her. So she created a ghost that would haunt the people responsible long after she was gone. The tape labeled, "Don't Open," was never meant to hide a secret forever. It was Hannah's carefully planned insurance policy, waiting silently in the dark for the one person she trusted enough to finish what she could not. In the years following the trials, the state legislature passed a series of strict academic oversight laws. Officially, the new regulations require independent ethical reviews for all university behavioral studies, ensuring that no institution can ever again hide behind closed doors or prioritize funding over human safety. But among the students and faculty who know the true history of the campus, the legislation is quietly known as Hannah's Rule. Today, the university looks vastly different. The basement offices where Dr. Ars once conducted his protected research have been completely gutted and remodeled. The heavy, windowless doors are gone, replaced by open study spaces and bright natural light. And just outside the main library, near the exact path where Hannah walked on that cold November night, a small bronze memorial plaque now rests beneath a young oak tree. The inscription does not mention the criminal investigation. It does not mention the powerful men who went to prison or the vast corruption that nearly erased her from history. It simply bears the name of a 20-year-old psychology student who believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. A cold case only remains cold as long as people agree to stop looking. But Hannah Brooks understood something fundamental about human nature. She knew that eventually someone would search the attic. She knew that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, is always waiting to be found. This has been another true story from Fame Buzz. We will see you in the next investigation.